It's not the load that we bear that makes us, but what we decide to give, even when we have nothing left. This is the tale of an individual who turned adversity into power, purpose, showing that generosity isn't born from plenty, but from the heart. The day always started before sunrise. The streets were empty. The distant hum of engines and the resonance of footsteps belonging to people who labored before the rest of the world woke up. Among them was Daniel. Hans spoke of toil, of survival, and of stoic endurance. He resided in a tiny one-room flat on the outskirts of town. Cracked paint, a dimly lit bulb, staring out over the tops of a world that had forgotten about him. Every day, he stuffed his tattered pack with tools and half a loaf of stale bread. Life hadn't been good to him, but it had taught him something much more profound than comfort: resilience. Daniel was not bitter. He had lost so much. His dreams, his savings, but he had retained one thing poverty could not take: his heart. While others grew hard from hardship, he found warmth in little things. A stranger's shared coffee, a wave from a neighbor, a child's laugh on the bus. His days were spent in silence. Work was uncertain, wages low, and yet he found solace in stubbornness, had an unspoken purpose, each hurt a still voice. The world may have called him poor, but Daniel had a wealth no one could notice. Compassion. Pockets were empty, his heart was rich. For deep inside, Daniel understood. Life is not lived by what we possess, but by how much of ourselves we offer. Even when we have nothing to give, it was this unspoken faith, forged through adversity, that one day would transform his life, and the lives of so many, into a tale of hope. It was a cold night, the kind that had silence so heavy that it could suffocate hope. Daniel perched at the end of the bed, fingers intertwined, gazing at the lone envelope on the table: to pay rent. Final notice. The figures on the page flashed back like a reproach. For months, he had toiled double shifts, swept vacated corridors, and pulled crates until his back cried out. How much he toiled, life always appeared one step ahead, devouring more than it provided. His landlord's voice still rang from that morning. "One more week, Daniel. Afterward, I cannot assist you." That evening, with the city aglow outside his broken window, Daniel experienced something he hadn't permitted himself to feel in years: defeat. He gazed at his calloused hands. It hoisted, carried, and now shook. He considered calling someone. Anyone. But who? Too long pride had held him back. Friends had wandered off, family was lost, had withered under the burden of survival. The type of solitude that filled the space wasn't merely the lack of people, it was the lack of meaning. For one mad, perilous instant, he considered if it all still meant anything. But then, through the thin walls, he heard a noise. A soft, rhythmic laugh. The little girl down the hall, playing with her mother. Daniel shut his eyes. That laughter cut through his hopelessness like a glimmer of light through blackness. He drew breath. Something within him would not give way entirely. Because even in his worst, perhaps life hadn't taken all. Perhaps it was probing what remained. And in that broken instant the beginnings of kindness sprouted. The following morning dawned grey and still, as Daniel's thoughts had been the day before. He trudged to the corner store, calculating loose change in his pocket. Barely enough for a loaf of bread and a carton of milk. The clerk, Maria, with her customary warmth, but today her smile contained an added layer of compassion. "You all right, Mr. Daniel?" she inquired softly, glancing over his belongings. He nodded sharply. "Another day, Maria." But she noticed the fatigue beneath his words. The kind that no sleep could cure. When he went for his wallet, fell from his shaky fingers, and spilled onto the floor. He stooped to retrieve them, self-conscious. Maria slipped a few crumpled bills into his hand instead. "Left this for you," she whispered. He stared at her, perplexed. "Ooh." She simply smiled. "Does it matter?" Daniel stood there, gazing at the money. Not a lot, but enough to get groceries, perhaps even pay half the rent. His throat constricted. He wasn't accustomed to accepting aid, he had always been the giver. During his walk home, every step was heavier with feeling. The world around him, the passing vehicles, the children's laughter, the far-off rumble of life, all felt alive once more. For the first time in months, the burden on his chest started to lift. Who had given him mercy, but the deed kindled something inside him. A small, shaking flame of thankfulness. And in that still morning, Daniel took an unspoken oath one day: he would do the same for someone else. For kindness, once given, has but a single ultimate goal: to be returned. That evening, Daniel could not sleep. The bills still rested upon his desk, the future unclear. Yet something within him had altered. He kept thinking about Maria's words. Does it matter? No, perhaps it did not matter who had assisted him. Important was why. Because someone had noticed him. Someone had cared. And in a world that tended to pass by the wary, the invisible, and the struggling, that simple gesture had made him realize he was still alive, and that his life still meant something. He sat beside his window, observing the lights of the city twinkle like fallen stars on the streets below. For years he had seen them as far away, reminders of brighter lives than his own. But now, they stood before him differently. Every light was a reminder of someone struggling, staying alive, holding on. People like him. And in that still moment, Daniel vowed to himself, act of kindness had altered my day, perhaps another could alter a person's life. The next day, he collected what little he had. A used coat, 2 spare cans of soup, and some blankets, trolled around his neighborhood, distributing them to whomever might need them. No speeches, no requests, simply quiet charity. He noticed the thankfulness in a homeless man's eyes, the amazement in a mother's smile, when he handed her a blanket for her child. It wasn't much, but it was something. And for the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel helpless. That evening, as he came back home exhausted but content, he understood that giving isn't created out of plenty. It's created out of compassion. And just like that, struggle began to turn into strength, began to shape purpose. In the days that followed, Daniel's small acts of kindness began to ripple through the neighborhood like quiet waves. He never announced what he was doing, never asked for thanks. Yet somehow, people noticed. The man who once walked with his head down now carried a warmth that drew others in. One night, after he handed a bowl of soup to a woman waiting by the bus stop, an elderly woman, a boy who happened to be passing by on the street opposite, stopped and observed. The following day, the boy returned with his own sandwiches to distribute. 2 more neighbors had joined in by the end of the week, carrying blankets, tinned leftovers, even spare clothing. Soon, Daniel's simple gesture had grown into something more. A movement of empathy that extended beyond him. Several locals would meet in the park every Saturday with food, music, and laughter. Individuals who previously ignored one another now exchanged stories, pain, and hope. Strangers became friends, and the streets that previously seemed cold and divided started to feel like home. Daniel never thought he was a leader. He just saw people, their problems, their humanness, and did what little he could. But his quiet leadership became a connecting bridge of heart to heart, race, and circumstances. One night Maria came by to help distribute food and smiled at him and said, "You started this, Daniel." He shook his head, his eyes gentle. Kindness did. That's when Daniel understood that kindness doesn't only alter the recipient. It also changes the giver. Every gesture created a bridge, not of riches, but of empathy. And across those bridges, a fractured community healed. Together. What started as an individual's modest act grew to be a wave of change that extended far beyond the neighborhood where Daniel lived. Saturday helpers, as the residents began calling them, traveled throughout the city. Individuals from surrounding areas began leaving off contributions. Suitcases full of clothing, cartons full of canned goods, toys for kids. What really astonished Daniel wasn't the amount. It was the attitude. Woman who had once been given a meal came back weeks later with a tray of freshly baked homemade bread, shyly smiling as she said, "You gave to me when I needed it. Turn." A mechanic began fixing bicycles for free. A single mother started tutoring neighborhood children after work. Every gesture, no matter how insignificant, contained the same message. The ripple was real. One evening, as Daniel strolled across the park after another neighborhood event, he stood still and surveyed his surroundings. Laughter echoed through the air. Strangers were laughing together, children were running around, and the air was alive with a feeling of home he had not known in years. And it struck him. All of this was spontaneous. No groups, no donors. just individuals making a choice between kindness and apathy, hope and desperation. That's the magic of giving. It rebounds in ways you can never imagine. For every life you reach, 10 more sense the ripple. For every act of kindness, a new tale unfolds. As Daniel smiled as he gazed around at the smiling faces shining under the warm park lights. He had once felt invisible. Now his actions were causing other people to be able to see themselves. And in that reflection of compassion, he beheld the real definition of strength, not in that which we acquire, but in that which we give away. Months went by, and Daniel's tiny gesture had quietly evolved into a force of kindness throughout the community. Organizations started featuring his story, dubbing him the man who turned adversity into strength. Cameras clicked, journalists queried, formerly unknown face turned into an icon of hope. But Daniel didn't feel the attention was about fame. It was about remembrance. He recalled the nights he'd gone to bed with empty stomachs, the mornings when he didn't know where to go, and the strangers whose generosity had sustained him. So, when the mayor asked him to give a speech at a community gathering, Daniel didn't plan a big speech, he just spoke the truth. He addressed a sea of hundreds and whispered, "I used to think strength meant never needing help, but I've learned the real strength is in accepting help, and then offering it to someone else." The audience was silent, not from indifference, but from awe, resonated deeper than any polished speech ever could. After the performance, an elderly man came up to him, tears in his eyes. "Son," he said, "I was too proud to seek assistance, but after listening to you, I believe I'm prepared to attempt it." That moment touched Daniel more than any recognition could. Because he understood something strong. Acknowledgement does not last, but contemplation does. It wasn't about how many people were looking at him today, but how many people were viewing themselves through what he went through. That evening, when he walked home, did not feel like a hero. He felt human, deeply, profoundly human. And perhaps that is the quiet truth of generosity. Doesn't make one person stand out above others. It joins them all together. As seasons went by, Daniel's work rippled further than he ever thought. What began as meals shared in threes on a street corner had expanded into an ecosystem of hearts. Volunteers, small business owners, students, and retirees, united in one unspoken conviction, worth rebuilding. But even as the movement gained momentum, Daniel realized the most profound transformation wasn't in others. It was in him. Once, faith, in others, in mission, in life itself, had slipped from his grasp like grains of sand through the hands of 1,000 fingers. He'd witnessed too much apathy, too many slamming doors. Yet through generosity, through compassion, something holy had come back. One night while packing food with a volunteer group, Daniel glanced around. Laughter, music, freshly baked bread. And for the first time in years, he felt something that he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. He spoke quietly to a young volunteer. "Listen, thought life was about making it. But perhaps it's actually about believing. In yourself, in people, in the good that still exists." The girl smiled and said, "You made us believe again." That line resonated in Daniel's heart. It was not about religion or rituals. It was about faith in human beings. Understood then that kindness doesn't just feed the body, it feeds the soul. It reminds the world that there is still light, no matter how dark its crevices. The night finally came to a close as Daniel stood outside, gazing up at the stars. The same sky that had made him feel cold and infinite before now felt full of hope. He muttered to himself, "Everything once, but I found something greater. Faith." And for the first time, he believed it with all his heart. What had started as one act of kindness, a meal, a gesture, had expanded into a movement Daniel never could have foreseen. His tale had exceeded his own. It was a living ripple, expanding outward into countless lives, borne on compassion's unseen tide. While he strolled through the neighborhood where it all started, Daniel saw little things changing. A teenager assisting an old lady with groceries, owner placing additional sandwiches outside for people who could not afford them, kids gathering cans for charity. None of them knew Daniel, but they were all inspired by his story. That's the nature of kindness. Once let out into the world, it doubles and triples and quadruples in incalculable ways. One guy he assisted approached him and said, "You don't know me, but I know you. You remember That night you fed me, I quit drinking, I started again. His eyes shone with unshed tears. Because someone believed I could change. Daniel smiled, chastened, to save the world. Just to save one moment. But now he realized the truth: when you save one moment, you save a life. When you save a life, you save the world. Standing on the same street corner where his adventure had started, he observed the city go by with quiet pride. He understood that hope doesn't disappear when the lights go out or the tale concludes. It persists. In the hearts that it touches, in the actions it provokes, in the remnants of benevolence it leaves behind. Because authentic power is not in grasping power. It's in sharing light. And Daniel understood, as the sun set below the horizon, that his ripple had only just started. Years went by, yet Daniel's tale never grew dim. It grew stage. What was once a single man's unassuming battle against hopelessness had come to be a legacy of light that still led others years after his footsteps were gone from the sidewalks where it started, wasn't inked in headlines, and no monument carried his face. Yet his generosity lived on. In the hearts he'd touched, and in the decisions other people made as a consequence of him. Former strangers, once shattered by fate, now bore his message along. They guided children, gave away meals, and their own stories of resilience and kindness. Every action, no matter how small, created another spark in the burgeoning fire of humanity Daniel had kindled. Success equaled wealth or fame. Now he knew that actual success is the difference you make in other people's lives. Hope, he learned, isn't dependent on a title. It just requires a willing heart. One night, sitting on the park bench where he had previously cried in despair, sat back and watched the city lights come on. Thousands of small fires burning in the distance. Softly smiling, he knew those lights represented all that he had discovered, that darkness is not the absence of light, but the potential for it to burn. A young boy walked by and greeted him with a grin, offering a sandwich from a paper bag. "You look hungry," said shyly. Daniel chuckled. Life had come full circle. The kindness he once gave was now returning home. As he bit into the sandwich, he whispered, "This is how the world changes, one heart at a time." And as the darkness of the night grew, the legacy of light burned on, boundless, silent, and unrelenting. Ultimately, Daniel's quest wasn't about running from the storm. It was about learning how to shine through it. He started out as a man weighed down by sorrow, stumbling through nights that seemed interminable, but with compassion, he discovered purpose. With kindness, he discovered healing. The world did not instantly become perfect. It merely became lighter. He had lit a candle rather than cursed the shadows. And that's the reality of every human tale. We don't require power to create change, we merely require heart. A meal shared, a hand offered, compassion. These are the sparks that ignite hope where it has been lost. Years from now, the name Daniel might be unknown to people. But they will know how he made them feel. Seen, human. That is the measure of a well-lived life. So when your own way feels heavy, when the world around you feels cold, recall Daniel's legacy. Recall that each act of compassion, no matter how small, will send ripples that travel farther than you ever know. Because strength is not about never falling. It's about getting up again. And taking others with you. And sometimes, the most powerful tales of hope don't start with heroes. They start with individuals like Daniel. Simple hearts who decide to do something big, to give, to love. That light is still worth sharing. Because the flame of kindness never really goes out. It just waits for someone else to pass it on.